but I always
Master
just
Chief
regret it.
Spartan 117. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar will take it from here. Master Chief, out.
Hello and welcome to Koalatea Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. I'm Skylar Sokol.
And my name is Anthony Nicholas.
And we always record the intro perfectly on the first take.
Yep.
Today, we are going to delve back into something from our good buddy Jesse Schell, Anthony's best friend, Jesse Schell.
He just doesn't know it
He
yet.
just doesn't know it yet. Anthony's future best friend. And
Yes.
he has provided us in that his game design lens app that is available on mobile devices. There's a random button, and I just hit the random button and fell on lens 106, the lens of Utopia, and it felt like a good topic. So we're gonna go into that. So
Yeah.
So I just want to go over a little bit about what Jesse says about the lens of Utopia. So what Jesse says is, this is why it is of the utmost importance that when you choose new technologies, you choose the ones most likely to lead to a better world. At this point in time, I believe that these 5 types of technologies have the best chance of fulfilling that dream. And he goes in to specify a few different ways he thinks that technology and games more specifically can bring about a utopia, a better world. He says magical interfaces. Intuitive interfaces are not enough. Players want interfaces that feel magical. And he calls out iPhones and iPads. Then he says fair payment. The models for how video games are purchased have changed radically over the last decade as many experiments have taken place. And still, players don't really find the systems we have for selling games entirely fair. That's a good one we'll talk about. He then says less A, more I. That's referring to artificial intelligence. He wants more intelligence, less artificial. It's cute, but basically just talks about AI is a big thing in upcoming technology, and obviously it is. Then he says family and friends. People love playing games together. They don't want to be alone, and there are a lot of missed opportunities in that space for games. He calls out, where are the games that a husband and wife will be delighted to play together night after night? Where are the games that put a whole family on a quest? Where are the games that help connect children with their remote grandparents? Yeah, interesting. And then the last one is transformation. People play games for light amusement, yes, but what if you could make games that help people change into the people they truly want to be, transforming them mentally, physically, and spiritually? This is hard to deliver, but there's great demand for it, as the success of things like Wii Fit and Luminosity has shown. If you choose technologies that help people improve themselves, you will undoubtedly be leading us to a better world. Yeah, I think that is a good introduction to this topic.
Yeah. I would just, if I can just add one other thing he says in this chapter. He says before he's the context that he's saying this in, right, is talking about how technology in games plays such a big role, right? In this case, this chase for a utopian reality. And he says the potential for dramatic change that technology offers is going to be naturally interesting, but there's something more. There's something that technology offers that every human being who ever lived has sought: utopia. You know, a desire for utopia is something we all have in common. The dream of a perfect world is the driving force behind so many things: schools, churches, governments, laws, inventions, internet, startups, blah, 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 blah. And then he proceeds to say a few other things, including what you just read. These five areas in technology to kind of like focus on, in his opinion, right? That bring that about.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, I just want to say this is one of the zillion of examples in this particular book that I think convey the beautiful kind of creative aspect of games that so many times, especially at least in the big AAA games that we see go seem to be missing, right? Like,
yeah, definitely.
You mentioned this fair payment idea, and really in several of these categories. I don't know about you, but I feel like indie games generally do a better job of meeting more of these 5 categories than AAA games.
Yeah, and just meeting the overall concept of bringing good to the world. I think out of these categories, right, some of them are a little superficial, like interfaces feeling magical, sure, like, but when you compare that to something like Transformation or something like Fair Payment, those really stand out to me as things that like really matter and really bring us to like a better world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is an interesting point. When we kind of just brought up the topic when we were discussing what we could talk about today, I made that I brought you that point too. It's like what constitutes like bettering the world, right? Like magical interfaces and the less A, more I, maybe you could even say, goes along these lines of it maybe doesn't have a direct correlation with I don't know, improving like that 5th category that he was talking about, like someone emotionally or even physically, mentally, spiritually. Like, what is a magical interface? You know, how can Rocket League do that? You know what I mean? Like, can Rocket League do that? And does that, if it doesn't, if it can't, right? Like, it doesn't have a narrative story. Maybe like a game like God of War, Last of Us can somehow present some of these deeper, not philosophical, maybe to some extent philosophical, but like these deeper emotional stories and exploration of like human experience. Rocket League is cars playing soccer.
I mean, Rocket League falls into the bringing friends and family together category, though, which I think is another valuable category, for sure. Granted, like, and Rocket League's accessibility is one way that it sort of does a good job in that category better than some other games. That, like, anyone can sort of enjoy it. Although, I'm not sure Rocket League's the kind of game that's going to bring his grandchild closer to his remote grandparent, right? A grandparent isn't really the target audience for Rocket League. So, not entirely, but that's definitely the category there that it is shooting for. But if we're talking about games bringing you to a better world, I don't know if Rocket League would be a choice for me. Like, that's not on my list, right? I'm not thinking that Rocket League is a game that's really trying to do that, and that especially relates to like the fair payment model and stuff like that. Rocket League has gone through a lot of changes and trouble in the payment space, right? They had like loot crates originally, then they went out of it. Now they're sort of back to it, and they have their like shop, and you know, they've done like, as far as payment goes, I'm not saying Rocket League has done an amazing job or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd agree.
So I don't know.
And that's an interesting point, because the free-to-play financial model is becoming more and more ubiquitous. I could work on my English a little bit, but I feel like in a lot of the implementations for these free-to-play models, it's basically like, let's inconvenience the player enough to the point where they'll spend money.
Yeah, well, like a lot of the mobile models are based on like saying, oh, you can't play anymore unless you pay money, or they get like so arbitrarily difficult that unless you pay money, you basically have to get very lucky to proceed.
We inconvenience you into forcing you to pay, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's why I stopped playing Clash of Clans on mobile. It's like probably the game that I technically played the most, but it hit a point where it was like I needed to spend money to get past the ridiculous amount of time it was going to take for me to grind out my bases and shit.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the big issue with the free to play concept, right? Is that like by making a game free, you create an expectation for the player that they're going to be able to fully enjoy the game at that price point of free, right?
Yep.
And that's like, that makes for a complicated moral issue, right? Like, are you basically deceiving the player by telling them your game is free and then making them pay money to enjoy it fully? I think to a certain extent you absolutely are, right? And that's why some of these companies are still opting for this like initial payment barrier model, because like even games that have, like Rocket League, for example, is a good example of this, right? Where you pay an initial price for the game. So you've already like committed money, you expect that you're going to get your value out of that, and I think you totally do. And then they add cosmetics on top that you don't need to pay for at all for any reason. Yeah. Like in that way they've done a good job in their like most recent iteration. Although granted, now they're free to play, right? Now Rocket League is free to play, which is crazy considering how much gameplay you get out of paying nothing, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's this, and on the other end of the spectrum, you now have games raising their price to $70 in some cases, right? And at least based off of the interactions we've had on Instagram with our community when we've talked about $70 games and in various contexts, whatever, it's almost always like games need to go the other direction, right? Like they need to get cheaper.
Well, these people playing Fortnite now kind of expect that, right?
Yeah, I think that's one thing. They've this newer generation's conditioned to like, why do I have to pay for a game? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's the whole reality of like games are more expensive to make. How do you make money? It's weird.
Well, I think the studios have done a horrible job of justifying the higher price point. Like they haven't like come out and talked about why they have, like, if you want to justify a higher price point, you come out, you give the breakdown, you're like, here's why, look at this, like, you like our game, well, if you pay $70, then the people making the game can actually make their money back. But without that, it's easy to just assume that like, oh, they're greedy and want more profit, right?
I think that's got to be where that eventually leads, is that eventually they show you enough behind the curtain, then you're like, wait a minute, like you would be good if you only, bought, if we buy, you're telling me if this is what you need and we buy whatever 1 million copies, you should be good. So why the fuck do we have microtransaction?
Right.
So I'm guessing
Totally.
that's maybe one of the reasons why they
that's
don't want
the issue,
to.
right? A lot of these AAA companies are looking to make more money, right? That's their goal. They are a corporation. And that's
one last thing I'll just say on the fair payment, because honestly we could probably talk about it the whole time, right?
And I think actually the other categories are more interesting in a way. So
right. The last thing I'll say there is I personally feel one way they could maybe make this more fair and meet the expectations of the consumer a little better in the game space is AAA games should stop trying to make fucking 500-hour experiences and just make a really compelling like 15 to 30-hour experience, and sell it for less, spend less time developing it. Don't spend 7 years making a game, just spend 2 to 3, make whatever that is, sell it for a solid polished price, maybe even have multiple teams doing others. I don't know. I think like condensing the experiences, and not always, you see this with Marvel Avengers, right? They fucking Square Enix, I think, lost over $60 million on that game so far, right? Big ass, huge development effort. We put all this money. We're gonna do like this open, big MMO or like shared world, beat 'em up thing. It's the Avengers. We'll put cosmetics in, and like nobody fucking cares. Like they spend so much time on these experiences that are so hard to make compelling, and you just fucking blow money. If you would have used Square Enix and made just like a bunch of like compelling sequences for the Marvel characters, gotta imagine that would do better. Look at Spider-Man on the PS4.
Right, yeah. You just make a Spider-Man for each of the Marvel characters and boom.
Just do Spider-Man, but like for Iron Man, for Thor, for whatever.
Yep.
Easy.
It's done. Yeah. I do worry though, like the opposite side of that spectrum, right, is like the Call of Duty model, right? Where you're just like chugging out the same experience every 2 years or whatever.
Well, and I think you're starting to see I just had this morning with, by the way, if you're listening, with our new Coffee with Bramoala series on Instagram. I went Instagram live with our community today, and we talked a lot about Cold War, and basically most of all the Call of Duty guys were like, yeah, it's okay. Meaning this like 3-year development cycle per studio every year of fucking Call of Duty is maybe starting to hit its limit, on the quality front. I mean, it's already been diminishing for a long time, I think generally people feel, but maybe it's really starting to hit it. They didn't even have, do you know that they said Cold War doesn't even have ranked modes right now?
Excuse me? The game's out, right?
How did you launch? Yeah. And I Googled it, and the Reddit post that came up was like, why are there no ranked modes? Maybe if you're listening to this and it's there, but
what?
The people in our stream they thought there were no ranked modes. They were all adamant that there were no ranked modes. So if it is there, nobody fucking knows.
That's actually insane. That's horrible.
I can't believe that's a thing.
Anyway, yeah, moving forward.
Fair payment. Yes.
I want to talk about AI for a bit, because like
yes.
It's really interesting, right? Because you don't really think about like games using AI as necessarily bringing good to the world, but I think one way you can define bringing good to the world is bringing people like happiness, right? Bringing people joy, giving people something to an experience that they can't really have elsewhere, I think is a way to bring good to the world to some degree. I don't know if it's as much good as transformation games bring to the world, but obviously those are nearly impossible to do effectively. And so I don't know, what are ways you feel like how you can bring more like I to AI, like Jesse Schell says, bring more intelligence to AI. What does that mean, and what does that do to like make games better?
Well, I'll actually talk about what I've observed recently, the last few installments in Halo, which the original Halos were well acclaimed at the time for their AI, and I have felt that, like many other games, the AI there's more more instances of A and there's less I. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's more guys on the battlefield, but what they I was telling you in the Halo Infinite demo, if you would have shown me an example of like there's a contextual awareness, and to be fair to 343, they actually did show some of this. There was like the chief crosses a certain boundary and a brute turns around, picks up a grunt and throws him, right? Like, so that's cool. They have to know the grunt's there and they whatever. And the grunt activates his suicide grenades while he flies. Like, cool. If you would have shown me an instance of like there's a brute on one level, there's a jackal on another level, and the brute like throws up a rifle to the jackal so that he can start sniping you, that's so much more fucking interesting than there's 3 brutes. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, and personally, what I think from the enabling like this utopia and bettering people perspective, what that does is it just feels when we talked about the 3 facets of human happiness, the competence, the mastery, the relatedness, you know, when you beat an intelligent opponent, you feel more competent, right? I think that's a more satisfying experience.
Totally. It brings you closer to the experience of playing with a human, which, as the other category shows, friends and family is its category on its own, right? Being able to like experience something against or with your friend is so meaningful. And then when you have like a fake friend or a fake enemy in a game that just feels like a robot, it's so much less valuable of an experience, right?
Yep. I mean, that's why that's a huge part of why I enjoyed the recent Doom, right? Doom 2016. The AI was really good, and how they interacted with each other. Very intelligent. They felt intelligent. They felt challenging, and you felt it was very rewarding to beat them, right? Like, so from that perspective, I think that's how that can kind of empower people, or whatever.
Evan brings up in the chat, Evco Music brings up the Alien and Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation being a horror-esque action game where at some point in the game the alien starts following you around the ship and it like tracks you down. It uses your sound, it uses like a bunch of things to track you, and I actually I churned on that game because I got like to a part that I really didn't enjoy, but people who have played through the whole game really tout the alien being this like amazing pinnacle of AI because it just feels real. It feels like it's hunting you, and not in like a cheap way, in like a cool in an intelligent way, I guess, and not in an artificial way, right? That's a big thing. Like, it can, when you fight like a boss in a game, there's a fine line between the boss's patterns feeling really artificial and feeling really intelligent, right?
Yeah.
Does the boss just smash you because he smashes every time, or does he smash you because it makes sense in the moment, right? And like developing to meet that fine distinction is really hard, and games that do it successfully do a great job of creating a unique experience.
Yep, agree. I'll touch on real quick this magical interfaces.
Sure. What do you think about it? Yeah, give me your run.
As you know, I'm pretty opinionated on menus and interfaces.
You love menus. When you scrolled in BioShock and it played music, that brought good to the world.
Yeah, that was very good. There's just there's a tell of craftsmanship on things like that, in my opinion. If a game has gone through, it's very rare. I don't think I can think of a game that had great menus and wasn't also subsequently a good game, if that makes sense, or a compelling experience that I played. It's just like it's like a craftsmanship feel. I agree with him on the feeling magical. I also personally, especially when they first came out, the iPhone is a great example in my opinion. I always thought how fluid it was and how reactive it was to the touch. and everything like that was just so solid. And this actually plays into some of his other points that we've talked about before, right? The toy. I don't think magical interfaces is just necessarily menus. It's like the game is responding to me as like I expect it to, as I tell it to, whatever. On that end, Rocket League's fantastic from that perspective. So anyway, I think I really like that magical interfaces.
Yeah.
I feel like interfaces is such a easy place to take you out of an experience.
It's true. That's true. Interfaces and the way like you interact with the game in that way are hugely tied to immersion. That's what I was thinking. Like, it's not just about having like a magical interface. It's also like being willing to have less interface, right?
Right.
And like just like let the player be immersed, not have this barrier of interface between the player and the experience. That's true. That's a really good point.
And Evan brings up in chat, he's saying it's like album art for music or vinyl blocks. It's all a part of the experience, and if it's bad, it sticks out.
It's true.
I agree.
Yeah, totally. Here, let me grab something.
Yep, 100%, Evan. There's definitely an artistic choice when it comes to menu design. Yeah, and like functionality, right? The ease of use. If it's like if you press start to make a settings change to your player, and you get lost in the menu, right? It pulls you out of the experience. I mean, we talked about that radio menu in Doom.
Yeah. Pausing the entire game, basically. Here, I just want to show, like, the album art thing is huge, right? Like, I literally bought this album. This is a vinyl that I bought, literally just because I like the artist and I love the art. And I'm not ever going to use this to play the music, but I think it's just cool to have and cool to sit there because the, like, interface design is so nice, right?
You know what's an example of a game that had a beautiful interface, at least in my opinion, and it greatly helped convince me to buy it, was Destiny.
Interesting, really?
I thought Destiny's main menu, where you're moving around your armors and stuff, you've probably seen it, right?
Uh-huh.
Like the guys in the middle and stuff. Always thought that was done so well. I thought navigating through the menus and stuff was very pleasant, too. It was very... again, like there was a sense of craftsmanship. Again, like you said, I churned on the game for other reasons, but its interface and its presentation of the world and its accessibility to it was a huge part of why I
Interesting. That's
ended
cool.
up picking up. So,
all right,
okay.
now it's time. Now it's time to talk about the big one. All right,
the big one.
Time to talk about transformation. I think friends and family is pretty obvious. I mean, I think there's interest there in the ideas Jesse Schell brought up about like how you connect children to their grandparents or like have a whole family play a game. But I think we could do a whole podcast on that, honestly, and maybe we should at some point. It kind of relates to our the venues discussion, right? Yep. It's very related to venues. So I think we skip that one for now in interest of time, and let's talk transformation. So have you ever experienced a game currently that you think you could say has that aspect? Do any come to mind? I don't know if the answer is yes for me either, and maybe to some degree, maybe. I mean, do you want me to talk about mine, or you want to?
Yeah, you go first.
So the things that have done that the most for me are definitely like the walking simulator genre of games, and it's sort of like you were mentioning earlier. It's these really narratively focused games. Those are the games that, at least right now, have done that the most for me. Games like What Remains of Edith Finch gives you like. It actually like gives you a new perspective on death. Like that is the goal of that game, to have its player come out of it with a different perspective on what death is like, on like what death means to life, which is like crazy, right?
Yeah,
to think
cool.
that a video game is attempting that. And Journey is another great example of this. That game, like you come out of it with like a different concept sort of friendship and like what companionship means. The Beginner's Guide is another great example Evan brings up, made by the same guy. The Beginner's Guide is a game that gives you a like different perspective on what it means to appreciate someone's art and like whether it's if someone makes an amazing piece of art, is it okay to share that with the world if they don't want it to be shared with the world? Stuff like that. The Beginner's Guide is a game you should totally play on stream because it's literally about video game development. It's very cool. Yeah. That's and just art in general. Yeah, that's a great example. Those are some examples of transformative games, and I'm struggling to think of games that aren't narratively focused that do that. And I think if we could come up with one that's like $1 million idea, right?
I agree. I really agree on that point. The games that come to mind are definitely narrative driven, or the reason why they're compelling from a transformation perspective is because of their narrative.
Yeah.
Actually, after having shit on AAA studios, the last game that made me, transform them mentally, physically, spiritually, the last game that affected me that way was actually Red Dead 2.
Interesting.
The story of Arthur Morgan specifically, which is the protagonist. You actually, I think an element that's interesting there too was that your choices in the game do affect the outcome, right? So I saw the choices that primarily my wife made, but like together sometimes we would decide what to do. But we basically chose him to be a good person,
right?
If that makes sense. And the story was very, I think in a lot of ways, very realistic. Like you don't actually, even as a good person, get to see out if you will, the justice that you feel should be done in that game. The game starts where you're kind of with your gang, you're with your crew, it's sort of like, okay, we're all banding together to get through this. But as time goes on, in the perspective of especially like the people who are in charge of the crew change and everything like that, there's this muddy, it's very realistic. This muddy exploration of what's the right thing to do, like who do I really have allegiance to, kind of thing. And by the end, like I said, you don't get that, I don't know, superhero movie ending where you beat the bad guy. You know what I mean?
And do you come out of it feeling like that's okay? Like, is that the transformative lesson you're learning, that you would expect you need that, but you don't need that? Or what about the, I'm just curious, like, what about this is the transformative part for you?
So at the end of, what ends up happening is your protagonist succumbs to disease, right? Before you can, but he's made up his mind.
Spoiler alert for Red Dead. If you care, you should skip ahead.
Spoiler Red Dead. Yes, for Red Dead 2. And the end, really what it explores is like, is it worth it? And I would say that it does not. It's not. On the other hand, while you don't get that definitive, like we kicked his ass, whatever ending, it's not the bad guy wins story either. It's what ends up happening at the very end is this exploration of like one of the guys, if you will, who was under the protagonist, who I actually think is the protagonist in Red Dead 1, John Marston, confronts the bad guy, if you will. And there's this moment of the main bad guy sort of turning good for a moment, like in realization of what the scene is, and sort of finishing the justice that you wish you would have, if that makes sense. So there's
sort of
like
saying that like you can, if you just are a good person and you do these things well, then other people may realize it, and like the justice can come without like
you actually
the force
doing
that,
it.
the
You know
force
what I
of
mean?
it,
Like it's like the effects of your good morality in this perspective went beyond you, and it even went beyond your life, right?
Yeah.
Like it affected the others, and in the end, there is this. At the end of the game, you do feel like there is a sense of justice. It's maybe not like the way you'd want it to happen, if you will, but it is there. And
that's
so,
interesting.
there are other routes though. I googled like the other routes, and I'll say that the other ones are interesting in their own right. They're like a different kind of exploration of the human experience. But there were several moments in Red Dead 2 where I was like, fuck, like I actually was thinking about it afterwards, and was kind of happy I probably won't ever be put in a position to like have to deal with that.
Yeah. I have to call out. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
I have to call out Journey here again, just because now I'm realizing I think a big tie to these transformative experiences, at least the ones we're bringing up, is games with dialogue, right? Being able to actually use dialogue to convey these messages is super important, and Journey has no dialogue, right?
Yeah.
So to have a game, that's probably the closest, and maybe that's why Journey is so well respected, right? Because that's the closest game that I've had to a transformative experience that literally has no dialogue. It does it solely through the game experience.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Right? And
sure.
Yeah, that's super unique. And it's funny, you bring up this vengeance idea. That's also the like core concept of The Last of Us 2, as far as I know, is also a vengeance focused game. And I'm not sure what the intention of the developers were, what they wanted as far as like the player's message though, but what people got out of it clearly was some people were like even to the point of being disgusted by like the degree of violence and vengeance in the game. To like, so even if the game necessarily, I assume that was intended by the developers, but like it created this conversation outside of the game that could have been transformative for people to like have to have this conversation about like, is this this degree of like revenge actually worth it for anyone?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the game is
I know what
you're
talking about, and I saw those conversations happening. Having not played it, I can't, necessarily give my opinion on it, but I would agree that it definitely opened up that conversation beyond the game, right? For sure. One other thing I wanted to mention in regards to transformation is like these experiences, right? Like how you process the experience is so relative to you, right?
Yep.
Like because Red Dead, for example, maybe is just not a big deal for you or not. But the other thing is like for me personally, I think if I would have played the Halo games, the Halo campaigns, which affected me a lot when I was 12, right now, I would have a much different opinion, right? Of like really the weight of the story and everything like that. But I think as like a 12-year-old guy, little kid, teenager, and thinking like getting to like embody like this like super badass guy who's saving people, who's sort of making the decision to do the right thing or whatever, it kind of impacts you differently because you're at a point in life where maybe you're trying to gauge really what direction you want to go on some of these things, right? So I think that if you had that same story now, and even if I do look at it kind of analytically now, it's not as like deep as it felt,
a little more superficial, I guess.
Right, or it was just more simple, right?
Right,
but
it's more black and white, right? And that's what you need when you're a kid, right? Is more black and white understanding.
Yeah. And I wonder if like I'm sure that some of these games, if I would have played them at different points in my life, or even if I wouldn't have played them until the future, I would. I think everything that you experience is in relation to where you are when you experience it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's another interesting thing, especially and commendable thing about games like Journey or whatnot that impact people of all demographics, right? Like all kinds of,
Now, I got to bring up one final game, the closing thought on this transformation. The game, I brought it up before, but it has to be mentioned here because it's probably the game that I think the most of any game I have ever played brings good to the world in a transformative way, and that's the game Kind Words. Okay. I'm not sure if you remember it, but it is a game on Steam. It's like $3 or something. Literally, the entire concept of the game is you write down things that are bothering you, questions you have in your life, just experiences you're having that you're upset, whatever. And then people can freely respond to those things, send you responses, send you stickers along with those responses. And that's the entire game. It's about people being able to just write down what's bothering them, what they're upset by, and and have people respond to that.
That's cool.
Of just random, real, anonymous people, right? Entirely anonymous. Everything is anonymous, right? So that's something that really only a video game could do, right? That's a game that is creating an experience that you literally can't get elsewhere that directly assists people with problems that they're experiencing in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least helps people feel listened to when they're not feeling listened to, right?
Yeah.
So,
no, 100%.
I felt like it came to my mind. I'm like, this has to be mentioned, right? Because that is 100% transformative, right? I'm sure there are tons of people who have literally had personal transformations as a result. I definitely did. I played that game when I was in a bad place, and some of the responses I got were really valuable to me in that moment. So
that's cool. You said that, and I'm like, I don't know what I would call the most transformative game I've played from that perspective. From at least it's so mentally and more like that mentally, spiritually. The physically one is interesting, the physically transformative.
Yeah, you never Wii Fitted, right? I wanted you to buy Ring Fit Adventure. I'm still waiting for the Ring Fit Adventure playthrough.
I feel like the most transformative game for me physically was fucking Dance Dance Revolution.
DDR, totally.
Yeah.
That's that, and honestly, that's that revolutionized physically transformative games.
No, it was for sure. It was You fucking broke a sweat, dude. I swear I burned more calories on that thing than an elliptical in a half hour.
For sure. I think absolutely. Yeah, that's hilarious.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know what the most transformative game I ever played. Again, it's made like it feels like from the context where I was at the time and where I listened to it and everything, I would say it was the Halo campaigns, but that was because I was 10, like
totally.
And those experiences.
And maybe you just haven't played it yet. Played the game that will be the most transformative, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Or maybe I haven't made it yet.
Whoa. And with that, speaking of that, where can people find us if they want to know what games we are making?
We're still getting used to this, but we have a patron game night question. I'm sorry, quality time question from our patron.
Yes. Speaking of which, we have a Patreon. That's one place you can find us. You can back us on Patreon, support us, get our merch basically on a payment plan. It's a really good deal. You should do it.
Yeah, you get access to behind the scenes content. We've been uploading some things. Just uploaded a bit of guitar stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now what's the question?
So from Evan himself, who was in chat today, you might have heard us calling out his name. He asks, do you see Nintendo changing up their system design anytime soon, other than just upgrading the parts for the Switch with newer generations?
Interesting question. So, I mean, Nintendo has been known for just coming out of left field with some brand new crazy idea every console cycle that they release consoles in. We saw that with the Wii, like one of the most successful consoles ever. The Switch again has basically revolutionized like how people can think about gaming in a way. And I think my inclination though is to say in this current generation the answer is no. Mainly because I think the Switch is still going very strong and doing extremely well.
Yeah. Yep. That was going to be my answer. I feel like how well the Switch is doing gives them a buffer there. I feel like they don't need to release a new thing until they find a really good, better thing.
Right, until they come up with some Switch or Wii level idea, right? To say like this is what we need to make next, yeah.
Yeah, people have made the comment in our Discord that a lot of the Switch library is still primarily like Wii U ports. And from the perspective of there's lots of experiences. Where's my Mario Strikers, bro? Like, where's my Mario Strikers? Fuck Nintendo. Like, right. There's still a lot of games they can release for that thing. And there is that rumor of like the Switch Pro coming later. I don't know. I feel like they'll sit on it until they've got some killer new thing. Although the Wii was super killer, and then they released the Wii U.
Yeah.
Kind of like I feel like before I would still fucking play the Wii, dude, if I still had it.
I'm tempted to say that the Wii to Wii U transition sort of happened at a different time. At a time where like this constant new console release innovation was like necessary to survive, or at least companies felt that way. Nowadays, like as we know, the Xbox and PS5, the new ones, are basically just like hardware upgrades to the last ones. They're not really that innovative. Like there are parts of them that you can argue are, but not compared to previous like generation leaps in innovation. So maybe Nintendo's
the SSDs are good.
That's what I'm saying. Like the SSDs are a thing, but like in the past we weren't talking about like reducing our loading times being the biggest innovation of our console, right?
Yeah.
So like I feel like maybe that means that Nintendo doesn't feel that pressure to like be one of those like iterative console companies anymore. I think they've sort of like found their niche, and now they can do their own thing even more than in the past. Yeah, and maybe the Wii U was a sign for them, should have been a sign for them that like
don't do that again.
Right. Maybe it's not. Maybe we don't have to go like ham just because the other companies are releasing a new generation.
Yeah, just be careful. You have momentum on your side. You're also building out market share. Like there's more and more people's with your console, which increases the chance of successful games, coming out, right? Like there's just more people to buy them and play them. So I don't know. This conversation can go into so many different directions, but maybe we'll leave it there for this podcast.
I mean, one last note: Nintendo did release a new console. It's their toothbrushing Pokemon game. Pokemon Smile.
I saw something about that.
I don't think it's actually a new console. I think it's just mobile, and it uses some sort of camera shit to make you brush your teeth or something. But that's the kind of thing I would maybe Nintendo. They made the new Mario Kart game, right? The like crazy AR Mario Kart where you like have real Mario Kart cars that drive around your like house, but it adds like AR shit. Like that's the kind of things I expect from Nintendo now. I think they'll like keep the Switch as their core experience, but maybe try smaller experimental things rather than big Wii U level experiments, right?
It's an interesting niche they find themselves in. Evan's pointing it out too, because he's saying they're the sort of the gold standard of portable / home gaming, and they own that niche right now, in my opinion. Yeah. Like they're the closest competitor in the foreseeable future I could see is the cloud gaming thing. But the thing that Nintendo does, at least like using the Switch as an example, better than anybody else, and it has historically done better than else, is like create compelling experiences that work in tandem with their hardware, right? So it's more than just like, here's a controller to control a remote instance of like what you could play on your TV. It's like it's like the example you just used with the Mario Kart AR stuff with whatever different
even
games.
Just like the motion controls and how they exist in their games. Like Sony and Microsoft have had motion control support in some ways for a long time, and they've never created experiences that are as compelling as the motion control kind of experiences that Nintendo has made.
Right. And I just Nintendo's is the best job of treating their hardware and software integration, I think, as a priority. And like leveraging it. So I'm not sure. I think there's a whole interesting conversation. We had it with the Discord today about what the future holds and what that looks like. I largely believe that console gaming the casual console market will transition eventually entirely probably to the cloud. Consoles won't even be a thing except for Nintendo. Like Nintendo, I could see kind of doing whatever the fuck they want. They could, like they usually do, like they could have this portable home gaming thing could be something that still has a place, as we're seeing in that future.
Well, and you would think that like mobile devices were going to replace that, but so far that has not been the case. We'll see if
I agree.
If we
I
get
agree.
there.
Yeah. Whether they kind of, I don't know, if they can continue to have that like premium mobile experience, they can probably win. It's just different. If you make a game like for an Xbox game right now, so it's for a TV, is it cool that you can play it on your phone with xCloud? For sure, it's cool, but it's not made for it. You know what I mean? Like, this to the contrary of like a lot of these Nintendo Switch games. So anyway,
totally. All right, so now for real, tell us. If people want to get in, ask Patreon questions, talk to you on the Discord, join Anthony's morning coffee, bramoala coffee hour. How do they do that?
The easiest way to do that is to go to koalaentertainment.com, because there you can find links to all our social media. Discord, as Skylar said, is where you also get the first details of our upcoming game, get some lore drops, Distinguished Incap, one of the projects in our server, actually just getting a new drop this week.
It's true.
Actually, Cryptic Bonnet getting one
send
last
that to
week
him.
too. Yes. So yeah, get the first chance of that. You also have a link, as Skylar was mentioning, to our Patreon, which includes a ton of benefits. Like it legitimately does. If you're an American subscriber, after 6 months of payment on our premium Koala Manjaro $10 a month plan, you get basically $55 worth of merch and stickers back. And if you're an international subscriber, you actually make money on it technically. Like if you were to buy the equivalent stuff through the merch store, it would cost more because of shipping and everything. So not only do you get a ton of value there for merch stuff, but you also get behind the scenes content. You get to ask your questions. You get patron game night in the Jevs. You can play a Jackbox with us like we did.
Jackbox.
Whatever, last week. So anyway, bunch of good stuff on the Patreon. And then, yes, you can find us on Instagram. We're always doing giveaways on Instagram. Always doing giveaways on Discord. There are a lot of reasons to check us out. You can follow us on Twitch, where we are talking right now.
Yep.
We stream our latest Quality Time podcast every Monday at 8:30. Also, we just recently launched, if you're a Halo fan, a Halo podcast, Craig Owala, that is really being led by a lot of the Halo guys in our community. I'm there too. It is, I'll say, there's a reason why this one's called Quality Time. And the other one's called Craig Koala.
You really
it's,
embody the Craig experience.
Yes, exactly. We're embracing the fact that Craig's in the name. If you're looking for like I would say a level-headed, casual, romping bullshittery of a time through Halo Town, Craig Koala is your
with
thing.
a bunch of Zoomers and Anthony.
Yes, keeping them in line, keeping their Halo opinions in line.
Yes. Well, anyway,
so, yes.
Thanks for listening.
Join us. Tell us what you want us to talk about.
Woo! Yep. We'll talk to you next week.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Shout out to all of our Koala Manjaro subscribers, especially I Got Your Potatoes, Marcus the OK, and Sand Squid. Thank you guys so much for your unbelievably generous support. And to all our Koala-tacular subscribers, thank you as well. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, I know that you get a ton of stuff with your benefits. You can find all the information following the link in our bio wherever you're at. Go to our link tree, go to patreon.com, search KO Koala Entertainment. There you can find the multitude of benefits that await you when you subscribe. Thank you again so much.